In our first reading this morning, we find St. Paul and St. Barnabas return to preach and minister at Lystra and Iconium and Antioch. Those are the very places that they had already suffered persecutions. And despite that, Paul and Barnabas are driven to return to the Christian communities that they had established, to teach and encourage those communities, to strengthen their faith. As we follow the missions of the apostles, we learn that while some people accepted their message, others rejected and persecuted them. But in their perseverance and suffering, the early evangelists were not just drawing on their own energy and grit. What these disciples reveal is that Jesus had kept his word and had given them the gift of the Holy Spirit. It was that Spirit that filled their spirits with a burning desire to preach and witness to their resurrected Lord. And when they returned home to their communities, they would not boast of their accomplishments, but rather boast of the Holy Spirit working through them in very unique ways. And today's reading ends with Paul and Barnabas at their home base in Antioch, where they called the church together and reported what God had done with them and how God had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. Something very much like that happens in parishes just like ours. When you volunteer or you're asked to teach religion to teens, or to be an RCIA team member, to work in a food pantry, to take communion to the sick. Often folks like you, like the early disciples, admit their limited knowledge and experience, but yet say yes to that invitation. They prepare for their mission and take guidance from the elders. They discover people are moved by their ministry, and more, those ministers' own faith take on a new life as, like Paul and Barnabas, they undertake the mission of preaching the gospel through their actions. How do these changes come about? How else but through the work of the Holy Spirit, working through their efforts. We too have been assigned in this very same way to proclaim the good news to the entire world. So where do our travels take us? We probably don't have to go on a whirlwind evangelizing mission like our two featured apostles. But still, our baptism has anointed all of us to be prophets in the very places that we find ourselves. There is no getting around that responsibility. So name your own mission field. Around the kitchen table. That could be real mission territory for some. At work, among friends, at social gatherings, online at the supermarket. I'm not suggesting that you need to stand on a soapbox and start preaching, but it is our actions, our values, judgments, our lifestyles that should stir up a curiosity for those around us. Who knows? People might be curious enough to ask you the big questions, like, what makes you so different? Or with all the problems that you have, how do you get your strength to go on? Or how can you remain so hopeful? It is then that the opportunity will arise for us to do exactly what Paul and Barnabas were doing, proclaiming the good news. We may feel that we are not theologically trained enough, but we should be speaking from the knowledge that we do have, our heart, and our experience of our faith. And like Paul and Barnabas, we won't be unaccompanied on our journey because the Holy Spirit will be our tour guide. That's what the Acts of the Apostles is really all about. It is the Holy Spirit working in ordinary people to help them introduce the good news and make, as Acts tells us, a considerable number of disciples. Give it a try.